The modern era of UFO sightings began in 1947 when Kenneth Arnold, a businessman and pilot from Idaho, spotted what he believed was a formation of flying saucers near Mount Rainier in Washington. Encounters with unidentified flying objects have been recorded since ancient times, but Arnold's sighting hooked the American public. It was the encounter that launched 1,000 theories. Some 6,000 UFO encounters are reported every year. 98% or more of sightings are basically misidentifications, and they're airplanes or Chinese lanterns or a variety of different things. What's left are the truly unexplained and mysterious, and those become the top UFO encounters of all time. We begin with the oldest known photograph of a UFO. The photo was taken in 1870 at Mount Washington, New Hampshire. This was originally a stereo photograph, which would be difficult to manipulate. At that time, the term UFO didn't exist, nor did Photoshop or other image manipulation techniques. The object is huge, oblong, and flying against a cloud background. No more information about the photo or object is known. Because of the date it was taken and its obvious flying capabilities, it is one of the most mysterious UFO encounters caught on film. In the 1890s, other mysterious aircraft began to be reported. Mystery airships or phantom airships are a class of unidentified flying objects best known from a series of newspaper reports originating in the western United States and spreading east during the late 1896 through 1897 period. Airship sightings were reported worldwide during the 1880s and 1890s. Mystery airship reports are seen as a cultural predecessor to modern claims of extraterrestrial piloted flying saucer type UFOs. Typical airship reports involved nighttime sightings of unidentified lights, but more detailed accounts reported ships comparable to a dirigible. Reports of the alleged crewmen and pilots usually describe them as human-looking, though sometimes the crew claimed to be from Mars. It was popularly believed that the mystery airships were the product of some inventor or genius who was not ready to make known of his creation public. For example, Thomas Edison was so widely speculated to be the mind behind the alleged airships that in 1897 he was forced to issue a strongly worded statement denying his responsibility. During the 1896 to 1897 time frame, numerous sightings of a cigar-shaped mystery airship were reported across the United States. One of these accounts appeared in the April 17, 1897 edition of the Dallas Morning News. Written by a Dallas Morning News stringer, S.E. Hayden, the alleged UFO is said to have hit a windmill on the property of Judge J.S. Proctor 2 days earlier at around 6 a.m. local time, resulting in its crash. The pilot, who was reported to be not of this world and a Martian, according to a reported Army Signal Service officer named T.J. Weems from nearby Fort Worth, did not survive the crash and was buried with Christian rites at the nearby Aurora Cemetery. The cemetery contains a Texas Historical Commission marker mentioning the incident. Reportedly, wreckage from the crash site was dumped into a nearby well located under the damaged windmill, while some ended up with the alien in its grave. Adding to the mystery was the story of Mr. Brawley Oates, who purchased Judge Proctor's property around 1935. Oates cleaned out the debris from the well in order to use it as a water source, but later developed an extremely severe case of arthritis, which he claimed to be the result of contaminated water from the wreckage dumped into the well. As a result, Oates sealed up the well with a concrete slab and placed an outbuilding atop the slab. To this day, the cemetery still contains the burial site of the alien. However, the county will not allow anyone to dig it up. On April 12, 1941, in Cape Girardeau, the Reverend William Huffman was called to what he thought was a plane crash to read the last rites of the passengers. A car arrived at his house, and they drove about 18 miles or so outside of Cape Girardeau, closer to the Chaffee area. When they showed up on the scene, it was not a plane crash. It was, allegedly, a flying saucer. Classic silver round disc that had crashed, that had started a fire. There were police and firemen there to take care of the scene, put out the fire on a local farmer's field. The Reverend arrived and saw a classic flying disc with part of the side ripped open and two alien bodies that were dead and one that may have been dying. It may have been alive, but couldn't breathe. The Reverend looked inside the flying saucer and saw wires and components of some sort of alien design. There were strange hieroglyphics and bizarre knobs and dials. The Reverend knew that he couldn't give the last rites. About that time, the Army Corps arrived from Sykeston Field and cordoned off the area and swore everybody to secrecy, then tried to confiscate all cameras. There were pictures allegedly taken that night of men holding one of the alien bodies, and somewhere out there, those pictures exist. The story came through Charlotte Mann, who was the Reverend's granddaughter, who began to give accounts of the story in the late 70s. It was a document of a deathbed confession by the Reverend himself. Reverend Mann told the story to his granddaughter, and she had seen some of the pictures. To this day, no one knows where the photos are now, but many families in the area remember the event. It could be the first UFO crash in North America, and certainly is one of the top UFO mysteries of all time. A photo published in the Los Angeles Times on February 26, 1942, has been cited by some ufologists and conspiracy theorists as part of evidence that an extraterrestrial visitation happened. They assert that the photo clearly shows searchlights focused on an alien spaceship. The Battle of Los Angeles is an incident that occurred less than 3 months after the United States entered World War II in response to the Imperial Japanese Navy's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and 1 day after the bombardment of Elwood on February 23rd. Initially, the target of the aerial barrage was thought to be an attacking force from Japan. The photo clearly shows a saucer craft in the searchlight's crossed beams. Several buildings and vehicles were damaged by shell fragments, and 5 civilians died as an indirect result of the anti-aircraft fire. 3 killed in car accidents in the ensuing chaos, and 2 of heart attacks attributed to the stress of the hour-long action. The incident was front-page news along the U.S. Pacific coast and across the nation. To this day, no one knows what they were shooting at, and no wreckage was ever found. Many believe this was a UFO that appeared at the wrong place and at the wrong time. The modern-day UFO phenomenon began in 1947 with the aforementioned Kenneth Arnold UFO sightings. Private pilot Kenneth Arnold claimed that he saw a string of 9 shiny unidentified flying objects flying past Mount Rainier at speeds that Arnold estimated at a minimum of 1,200 miles per hour. This was the first post-war sighting in the United States that garnered nationwide news coverage and is accredited with being the first of the modern era of UFO sightings, including numerous reported sightings over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Of all the top UFO encounters, one would be remiss without mentioning Roswell, New Mexico. In July 1947, something happened northwest of Roswell during a severe thunderstorm. Was it a flying saucer? Was it a weather balloon? What happened? The answer is nothing for many years, until leading UFO researcher Stanton Friedman came across the story in the early 1980s and began to search for information and witnesses. That research brought him to Roswell, looking for the public information officer who had been at Roswell Army Airfield in 1947. That officer was Lieutenant Walter Haut. He still lived in Roswell and remembered the press release and the orders from his commanding officer. Friedman's investigation also led to many others, both military and private, who had information to add to the Roswell incident story. Stepping into the picture very strongly in the late 1980s were Don Schmitt and Kevin Randall and Tom Carey. Since then, Schmitt and Carey have dedicated their research to Roswell. The debris recovered by Ranger W. Mac Brazel was gathered by the military from the Roswell Army Airfield under the direction of Base Intelligence Officer Major Jesse Marcel. On July 8, 1947, Public Information Officer Lieutenant Walter Haut issued a press release under the orders from Base Commander Colonel William Blanchard, which said basically that we have in our possession a flying saucer. The next day, another press release was issued, this time from General Roger Ramey, stating it was just a weather balloon. That was the start of the best known and well documented UFO cover-up. Once it became public, the event known as the Roswell Incident, the crash of an alleged flying saucer, the recovery of debris and bodies, and the ensuing cover-up by the military, was of such magnitude and so shrouded in mystery that 70 years later, there are still more questions than answers. Books have been written and TV documentaries have been filmed. Witnesses have come forward. Skeptics have issued rebuttals to the incident, and the debate continues. The tiny town of Roswell flourishes due to the incident to this day. It is a mecca for UFO enthusiasts and truth seekers. Some say the government still has the saucer and aliens hidden away in some bunker somewhere. Deathbed confessions continue to get reported by people who were there, and Roswell has a firm place in the top UFO encounters. On January 7, 1948, 25-year-old Captain Thomas F. Mantell, a Kentucky Air National Guard pilot, died in the crash of his P-51 Mustang fighter after being sent in pursuit of an unidentified flying object. The event was among the most publicized early UFO incidents. Later investigation by the United States Air Force Project Blue Book indicated that Mantell may have died chasing a skyhook balloon, which in 1948 was a top-secret project that Mantell would not have known about. Mantell pursued the object in a steep climb and disregarded suggestions to level his altitude. At high altitude, he blacked out from a lack of oxygen. His plane went into a downward spiral and crashed. In 1956, Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppel, the first head of the Project Blue Book, wrote that the Mantell crash was one of 3 classic UFO cases in 1948 that would help to define the UFO phenomenon in the public mind, and would help convince some Air Force intelligence specialists that UFOs were a real physical phenomenon. The other two classic sightings in 1948 were the Charles Whitted UFO encounter and the Gorman dogfight. Historian David M. Jacobs argues the Mantell case marked a sharp shift in both public and governmental perceptions of UFOs. Previously, the news media often treated UFO reports with a whimsical or glib attitude reserved for silly season news. Following Mantell's death, however, Jacobs notes, the fact that a person had died in an encounter with an alleged flying saucer dramatically increased public concern about the phenomenon. Now, a dramatic new prospect entered throughout the UFO community. They may not be only extraterrestrial, but potentially hostile as well. The Aztec, New Mexico UFO incident, sometimes known as the Other Roswell, was a flying saucer crash alleged to have happened in 1948 in Aztec, New Mexico. The story was first published in 1949 by Arthur Frank Scully in his Variety magazine columns, and later in his 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers. Beginning in the 1970s, some ufologists resurrected the story in books claiming the purported crash was real. In 2013, an FBI memo claimed by some ufologists to substantiate the crash story was dismissed by the Bureau as a second or third-hand claim that we never investigated. According to Scully, in March 1948, an unidentified aerial craft containing 16 humanoid bodies was recovered by the military in New Mexico after making a controlled landing in Hart Canyon, 12 miles northeast of the city of Aztec. The craft was said to be 99 feet in diameter, the largest UFO to date. Scully named as his sources two men identified as Newton and Guevara, who reportedly told him the incident had been covered up and the military had taken the craft for secret research. Scully wrote that the crashed UFO, along with other flying saucers captured by the government, worked on magnetic principles. According to Scully, the inhabitants stocked concentrated food wafers and heavy water for drinking purposes, and every dimension of the craft was divisible by 9. In the late 70s, Arthur Leonard Stringfield purported that not only was the incident real, but that the craft involved was one of many captured and stored by the U.S. military. In later years, many alleged first-hand accounts of the Roswell crash contained the Aztec crash story, with some claiming the craft was made of a material impervious to all heat, while others claiming the craft was damaged by the crash. The supposed humanoid bodies were said to measure between 36 inches and 42 inches in height and weighed about 40 pounds. Ufologists claim that shortly after the craft was downed, the military cleared the area of evidence, including the bodies, subsequently taking it to Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The Aztec UFO crash is certainly one of the top UFO encounters of all time. The McMinnville UFO photographs were taken on a farm near McMinnville, Oregon, United States, in 1950. The photos were reprinted in Life magazine and in newspapers across the nation, and are often considered to be among the most famous ever taken of a UFO. UFO skeptics believe that the photos are a hoax, but many ufologists continue to argue that the photos are genuine and show an unidentified flying object in the sky. In 1975, the negatives were found in the files of the News Register by Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist for the U.S. Navy and a ufologist. After completing his own study of the photos, Maccabee assured that the original negatives were finally returned to the Trents. Maccabee analyzed the photos and concluded that the photographs were not hoaxed and showed a real physical object in the sky above the Trent farm. Much of his analysis is based on densiometric measurements, similar to the photometric analysis done by Hartmann. Maccabee argued that the brightness of the object's underside suggested it was at some distance from the camera, not a smaller object close to it. Maccabee also analyzed the position of various objects in the image, as well as an image prepared by Hartmann when he visited the site in June of 1967. Based on this, Maccabee argued that the line of sight of the two images intersected some distance behind the power lines seen in the photos, provided further evidence in his opinion that it was not a small model suspended from the lines. Maccabee stated that his analysis of the object did not find any evidence of a thread or string suspending it from the power lines. The McMinnville UFO photographs remained among the best publicized in UFO history. Skeptics continue to explain the two photographs as being hoaxes and/or fakes. Ufologists continue to argue that the Trent photos are credible evidence that UFOs are real, a physical phenomenon. Evelyn Trent died in 1997, and Paul Trent in 1998. Both insisted until the end of their lives that the sighting and the photos were genuine. The interest surrounding the Trent UFO photos led to an annual UFO festival being established in McMinnville. It's now the largest such gathering in the Pacific Northwest and is the second largest UFO festival in the nation after the one held in Roswell, New Mexico. The Lubbock Lights were an unusual formation of lights seen over the city of Lubbock, Texas in August and September 1951. The Lubbock Lights incident received national publicity in the United States as a genuine UFO sighting. The Lubbock Lights were investigated by the U.S. Air Force in 1951. The Air Force initially believed the lights were caused by a type of bird called a plover, eventually concluded that the lights weren't birds, but they weren't spaceships. The Lubbock Lights have been positively identified as a very commonplace and easily explainable natural phenomenon. However, to maintain the anonymity of the scientists who had provided the explanation, the Air Force refrained from providing any details regarding their explanation for the lights. The first publicized sighting of the lights occurred on August 25, 1951, at around 9 p.m. Three professors from Texas Technological College, now Texas Tech University, located in Lubbock, were sitting in the backyard of one of the professors' homes when they observed the lights fly overhead. A total of 20 to 30 lights, as bright as stars but larger in size, flew over the yard in a matter of seconds. The professors immediately ruled out meteors as a possible cause of the sightings, and as they discussed their sightings, a second, similar group of lights flew overhead. The three professors, Dr. A.G. Oberg, chemical engineer, Dr. W.L. Ducker, a department head and petroleum engineer, and Dr. W.I. Robinson, a geologist, reported their sightings to the local newspaper, the Lubbock Avalanche Journal. Following the newspaper's article, 3 women in Lubbock reported that they had observed particular flashing lights in the sky on the same night of the professor's sightings. Dr. Carl Heminger, a professor of German at Texas Tech, also reported seeing the objects, as did the head of the college's journalism department. The 3 professors became determined to view the objects again and perhaps discover their identity. On September 5, 1951, all 3 men, along with 2 other professors from Texas Tech, were sitting in Dr. Robertson's front yard when the lights flew overhead. According to Dr. Grayson Mead, the lights appeared to be about the size of a dinner plate, and they were greenish blue, slightly fluorescent in color. They were smaller than the full moon at the horizon. There were about 12 to 15 of these lights. They were obviously circular. It gave all of us an extreme eerie feeling. Mead claimed that the lights could not have been birds, but he also stated that they went over so fast that we wished we could have had a better look. The professors observed one formation of lights flying above a thin cloud of about 2,000 feet. This allowed them to calculate that the lights were traveling at over 600 miles per hour. The photo was taken well before drones existed and remains one of the most mysterious and top UFO encounters of all time. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident, also known as the Washington National Airport sightings, or the invasion of Washington, was a series of unidentified flying object reports from July 12th to July 29th in 1952 over Washington, D.C. UFOs flew over and around the White House and Capitol. The most publicized sightings took place on consecutive weekends, July 19th through 20th and July 26th through 27th. UFO historian Curtis Peebles called the incident the climax of the 1952 UFO flap. Never before or after did Project Blue Book and the Air Force undergo such a tidal wave of UFO reports. At 11:40 p.m. on Saturday, July 19th of 1952, Edward Nugent, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport, which is today Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, spotted 7 objects on his radar. The objects were located 15 miles south-southwest of the city. No known aircraft were in the area, and the objects were not following any established flight paths. Nugent's superior, Harry Barnes, a senior air traffic controller at the airport, watched the objects on Nugent's radar scope. He later wrote, We knew immediately that a very strange situation existed. Their movements were completely radical compared to those of ordinary aircraft. Barnes had two controllers check Nugent's radar. They found that it was working normally. Barnes then called National Airport's radar-equipped control tower. The controllers there, Howard Coughlin and Joe Zacco, said they also had unidentified blips on their radar screen, and that they had seen a bright light hovering in the sky. It took off, zooming away at incredible speed. Coughlin told Zacco, "Did you see that? What the hell was that?" At this point, other objects appeared in all sectors of the radar scope when they moved over the White House and the United States Capitol. Barnes called Andrews Air Force Base, located 10 miles from National Airport. Although Andrews reported that they had no unusual objects on their radar, an airman soon called the base's control tower to report the sighting of a strange object. Airman William Brady, who was in the tower, then saw an object which appeared to be like an orange ball of fire. It was unlike anything I had seen before. As Brady tried to alert the other personnel in the tower, the strange object took off at an unbelievable speed. On one of the National Airport's runways, S.C. Pierman, a Capital Airlines pilot, was waiting in the cockpit of his DC-4 for permission to take off. After spotting what he believed to be a meteor, he was told that the control tower's radar had detected unknown objects closing in on his position. Pierman observed 6 objects, white, tailless, fast-moving lights, over a 14-minute period. Pierman was in radio contact with Barnes during his sighting, and Barnes later related that each sighting coincided with a pip we could see near his plane. When he reported that the light streaked off at high speed, it disappeared on our scope. At Andrews Air Force Base, meanwhile, the control tower personnel were tracking on radar what some thought to be unknown objects, and others suspected might be simply stars or meteors. However, Staff Sergeant Charles Davenport observed an orange-red light in the south. The light would appear to stand still, then make an abrupt change in direction and altitude, and this happened several times. At one point, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking an object hovering over a radio beacon. The object vanished in all 3 radar centers at the same time. At 3 a.m., shortly before 2 United States Air Force F-94 Starfire jet fighters from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington, all of the objects vanished from the radar at National Airport. However, when the jets ran low on fuel and left, the objects returned, which convinced Barnes that the UFOs were monitoring radio traffic and behaving accordingly. The objects were last detected by radar at 5:30 a.m. UFOs flying over our nation's capital is, of course, very disturbing and makes this sighting one of the top UFO encounters of all time. First Lieutenant Felix Eugene Moncla Jr., presumed dead, was a United States Air Force pilot who disappeared while performing an air defense intercept over Lake Superior in 1953. This is sometimes known as the Kinross Incident, after Kinross Air Force Base, where Moncla was on temporary assignment when he disappeared chasing a UFO radar blip. On the evening of November 23, 1953, Air Defense Command Ground Intercept Radar in Michigan identified an unusual target near the Sioux Locks, designated a UFO. An F-89C Scorpion jet from Kinross Air Force Base was scrambled to investigate the radar return. The Scorpion was piloted by First Lieutenant Moncla, with Second Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson acting as the Scorpion's radar operator. Wilson had a difficult time tracking the object on the Scorpion's radar, so ground radar operators gave Moncla directions towards the objects as he flew. Moncla eventually closed in on the object at about 8,000 feet in altitude. Ground control tracked the Scorpion and the unidentified object as two blips on the radar screen. The two blips on the radar screen grew closer and closer until they seemed to merge. Assuming that Moncla had flown either under or over the target, ground control anticipated that moments later the Scorpion and the object would again appear as two separate blips. Donald Kehoe reported that there was a fear that the two objects had struck one another, but the single blip continued on its previous course. Attempts were made to contact Moncla via radio, but without success. A search and rescue operation by both the United States Air Force and the RCAF was quickly mounted, but failed to find a trace of the plane or the pilots. Weather conditions were a factor in hampering the search. To this day, Moncla is presumed dead, and his aircraft was never recovered. Did First Lieutenant Felix Eugene Moncla Jr. encounter a UFO? Was he taken by the occupants of the UFO? No one knows, and this one remains a mystery in the annals of top UFO encounters. Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who claimed they were abducted by extraterrestrials in a rural portion of the state of New Hampshire from September 19th to September 20th of 1961. It was the first widely publicized report of an alien abduction in the United States. The incident came to be called the Hill abduction and the Zeta Reticuli incident because the couple stated they had been kidnapped by aliens who claimed to be from the Zeta Reticuli system. Their story was adapted into the best-selling 1966 book, The Interrupted Journey, and the 1975 television movie, The UFO Incident. In September 2016, plans were announced to make a film based on the events with an unknown release date. Most of Betty Hill's notes, tapes, and other items have been placed in the permanent collection of the University of New Hampshire, her alma mater. In July 2011, the State Division of Historical Resources marked the site of the alleged craft's first approach with a historical marker. According to a variety of reports given by the Hills, the alleged UFO sighting happened on September 19th of 1961 around 10:30 p.m. The Hills were driving back to Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls in Montreal. Just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty claimed to have observed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upward to the west of the moon. While Barney navigated U.S. Route 3, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star, only it moved upward. Since it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look, as well as to walk their dog, Delcy. Barney stopped at a scenic picnic area just south of Twin Mountain. Betty, looking through binoculars, observed an odd-shaped craft flashing multicolored lights travel across the face of the moon. Through binoculars, Barney observed what he reasoned was a commercial airliner traveling toward Vermont on its way to Montreal. However, he soon changed his mind because, without looking as if it had turned, the craft rapidly descended in his direction. This observation caused Barney to realize this object that was a plane was not a plane. They quickly returned to the car and drove toward Franconia Notch, a narrow mountainous stretch of the road. Approximately 1 mile south of Indian Head, they said the object rapidly descended towards their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge, silent craft hovered approximately 80 to 100 feet above the Hill's 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air and filled the entire field of view in the windshield. It reminded Barney of a huge pancake. Carrying his pistol in his pocket, he stepped away from the vehicle and moved closer to the object. Using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen about 8 to 11 humanoid figures who were peering out of the craft's windows, seemingly looking at him. Red lights on what appeared to be bat-wing fins began to telescope out of the sides of the craft, and a long structure descended from the bottom of the craft. The silent craft approached, and Barney observed the beings were not human. Barney tore the binoculars away from his eyes and ran back to his car. In a near hysterical state, he told Betty, "They're going to capture us." He saw the object again shift its location to directly above the vehicle. He drove away at high speed, telling Betty to look for the object. She rolled down the window and looked up. Almost immediately, the Hills heard a rhythmic series of beeping or buzzing sounds, which they said seemed to bounce off the trunk of their vehicle. The car vibrated, and a tingling sensation passed through the Hills' bodies. The Hills said that they experienced the onset of an altered state of consciousness that left their minds dulled. A second series of beeping or buzzing sounds returned the couple to full consciousness. They found that they had traveled nearly 35 miles south, but had only vague, spotty memories of this section of road. After the encounter, Betty began to have a series of dreams where she remembered details of the UFO incident, including being abducted and a medical examination. Through hypnosis, both Betty and Barney separately recalled vivid memories of the encounter, as well as a star map Betty was shown by the aliens and a pregnancy test that didn't exist in 1961. Barney passed away in 1969, while Betty lived to 2004. The Hill abduction is one of the most extensive and exhausted UFO investigations of all time. The star map Betty described was proven to be an actual map of the Zeta Reticuli star system. She drew it well before any astronomers on Earth knew it existed. Many have tried and failed to debunk the Hill case, and it remains one of the top UFO encounters of modern times. On the evening of October 11, 1973, co-workers 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office they were fishing off a pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River in Mississippi when they heard a whirring, whizzing sound. They saw two flashing blue lights and an oval-shaped object 30 to 40 feet across and 8 to 10 feet high. Parker and Hickson claimed that they were conscious but paralyzed, while three creatures took them aboard the object and subjected them to an examination before releasing them. Within days, Pascagoula was the center of an international news story, with reporters swarming the town. Ufologists James Harder of the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization and J. Allen Hynek interviewed the two men. Harder attempted to hypnotize them and concluded Hickson and Parker experienced an extraterrestrial phenomenon, while Hynek believed they had a very real, frightening experience. Hickson later appeared on talk shows, gave lectures and interviews, and in 1983 authored a self-published book, UFO Contact at Pascagoula. Hickson claimed additional encounters with aliens in 1974, alleged that the aliens told him that they were peaceful. Parker later attended UFO conventions and has written 2 books about his encounter, as well as appeared in a documentary including others who witnessed the UFO that night. Charles Hickson died of a heart attack at age 80 on September the 9th, 2011. Charlie told his story until he died, claiming it was, in fact, all true. Calvin continues to make appearances at UFO conventions, and his story remains solid. He says he will tell the truth of the encounter till the day he dies. The Pascagoula UFO abduction continues to baffle debunkers to this day. The Travis Walton UFO incident was an alleged alien abduction of an American forestry worker, Travis Walton, by a UFO on November 5, 1975, while he was working near Snowflake, Arizona. Walton reappeared after a 5-day search. The Walton case received mainstream publicity and remains one of the best-known alien abduction stories. Walton wrote a book about his purported abduction in 1978 called The Walton Experience, which was adapted into the 1993 film Fire in the Sky. According to Walton, on November 5, 1975, he was working with a timber stand improvement crew in the forest near Snowflake, Arizona. While riding in a truck with 6 of his co-workers, they encountered a saucer-shaped object hovering over the ground approximately 110 feet away, making a high-pitched buzz. Walton claims that after he left the truck and approached the object, a beam of light suddenly appeared from the craft and knocked him unconscious. The other 6 men were frightened and drove away. Walton claimed that he awoke in a hospital-like room, being observed by 3 short, bald creatures. He claimed that he fought with them until a human wearing a helmet led Walton to another room where he blacked out as 3 other human-looking beings put a clear plastic mask over his face. Walton has claimed he remembers nothing else until he found himself walking along a highway with the flying saucer departing above him. The encounter was extensively investigated as Walton was missing for 5 days, and his co-workers came under scrutiny of murder. All took and passed lie detector tests and remained solid that their encounter did happen, even though many of the parties do not get along. The Allagash abduction is a purported UFO sighting and alien abduction claimed to have occurred in Allagash, Maine, United States in 1976. Brothers Jim Werner and Jack Werner, with friends Charles Foltz and Charles Rack, claimed that they were abducted by aliens during a camping trip in Allagash, Maine, on August 20th of 1976. According to the four men, hypnotic regression enabled them to recall being taken aboard a circular UFO and being probed and tested by four-fingered beings with almond-shaped eyes and languid limbs. The men all claimed that when they set out fishing on Big Eagle Lake the evening of the UFO sighting, they had left a large fire burning at their campsite as a beacon to guide them back to shore during the pitch-black night. However, when they returned to the campsite, the fire had burned down much faster than they thought it should have, given the amount of time that they thought they had spent out on the water. This led to understanding the men had experienced missing time, and the encounter occurred during that time. In a later interview by St. John Valley Times, Charles Rack changed his story, saying he saw strange lights during the camping trip, but the abduction part of the story was a total fabrication, and he went along with the narrative for financial gain. The other members of the group stand by the abduction story. According to Jim Werner, Jack, Charlie, and I, after all these years, are still in agreement with the Eagle Lake event as we three remember it. We also accept the results of the hypnotic regression sessions and subsequent polygraph tests as supportive of an abduction scenario. The government had 3 official projects to investigate UFOs, and in 1969 they closed Project Blue Book and claimed they did not investigate UFOs any longer. This was not true. The Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, was a secret investigative effort funded by the United States government to study unidentified flying objects or unexplained aerial phenomena. The program was first made public on December 16th of 2017. The program began in 2007 with funding of $22 million over the 5 years until the available appropriations were ended in 2012. The program began in the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency. Although the official ATIP program has ended, a related group of interested professionals have extended the effort, founding a public benefit corporation and entertainment company named To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. ATIP came to a broader public attention on the 16th of December 2017 in 3 news stories in the Washington Post, Politico, and the New York Times. Gun camera footage of a UFO known as the Tic Tac UFO came to light, and the pilot confirmed it was a UFO. At least 6 Super Hornet pilots made visual or instrument contact with the UFO on November 14, 2004. Later, under pressure, the government had to concede that it did indeed run the program, and that all the footage leaked or released was in fact genuine. Since then, a plethora of government officials, politicians, military personnel, and those who worked on the project have come forward. It's pretty clear the government takes UFOs seriously. What is not known is if the government will finally admit UFOs are alien and what measures are being taken to ensure our airspace is protected. Captain Max Clark, commanding officer of the USS Nimitz, has said it is important his ship and everybody on it is kept safe from UFOs. From my perspective, we have an obligation to make sure the airspace is clear, whether it's UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. This comes just weeks after the Office of Naval Intelligence revealed the existence of a classified unreleased UFO video. The video was related to the notorious USS Nimitz Carrier Group 2004 encounter with a tic-tac-shaped UFO. The encounters remain a mystery, and the object's incredible speed and movements have led to speculation that it was extraterrestrial. Could it be we're getting closer to a complete disclosure that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth? Are we on the verge of a worldwide acknowledgement of the true nature of the flying craft? As more UFO encounters occur, eventually the truth will be told. When it does, that will be the greatest UFO encounter of all time.
Ignition sequence start. 6,